The autumn wind carries the scent of caramel apples and diesel fuel as Maya steps through Wonderland's rusted gates. The Oregon sky hangs heavy with storm clouds. Suddenly, her world tilts. She sees the antique carousel spinning wildly, horses breaking free, screams piercing the night air. Blood mixes with sawdust. She gasps, stumbling backward as Jake catches her arm. "Maya, you look like you've seen a ghost." The vision fades, but the metallic taste of fear lingers. The carousel's cheerful music now sounds like a funeral march. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped Jake's flannel jacket, her knuckles white against the red and black fabric. The vision had left her breathless. Every detail burned into her memory like a photograph she couldn't unsee. The carousel horse, as once painted in cheerful pastels, had become twisted, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intent as they broke free from their brass poles. "We need to leave now." Her voice came out as barely a whisper, but the urgency in her tone made both Jake and Sarah stop mid-stride. Sarah, already clutching a stick of pink cotton candy, rolled her eyes dramatically. "Maya, we just got here. I've been looking forward to this all month. Besides, I already bought the fast passes." She waved the colorful wristbands in the air, the plastic catching the dying light of the Oregon sunset. The amusement park stretched before them like a neon maze, its rides creating a symphony of mechanical sounds, the rhythmic clacking of roller coaster tracks, the hydraulic hiss of the tilt-a-whirl, and underneath it all, the hypnotic melody of the carousel. Maya felt her stomach lurch as she caught sight of the antique ride in the distance, its hand-painted horses bobbing up and down in their eternal dance. Jake studied her face with concern, his green eyes searching hers. "Hey, talk to me. What's going on? You've been weird since we walked through those gates." He gestured toward the entrance, where families with small children were still streaming in, their laughter mixing with the carnival atmosphere. "I saw something," Maya began, then stopped. How could she explain the vision without sounding crazy? How could she tell them she'd witnessed their deaths in vivid, terrifying detail? "I had this feeling, like something terrible was going to happen here tonight." The smell of funnel cake and popcorn wafted past them, carried on the cool evening breeze that rustled the dying leaves of the oak trees surrounding the park. Somewhere in the distance, a child squealed with delight as they rode the bumper cars, the sound eerily similar to the screams Maya had heard in her vision. Sarah grabbed Maya's other arm, her enthusiasm undeterred. "Come on, don't be such a downer. It's probably just pre-ride jitters. Remember when we were kids and you thought the haunted house at the county fair was actually haunted?" She laughed, but there was a slight edge to it. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? It's just a bunch of old rides." Maya wanted to scream that the worst had already happened in her mind, in her vision, in whatever supernatural glimpse of the future she'd been cursed with. Instead, she watched as a family walked past them toward the carousel, a little girl in a yellow dress skipping ahead of her parents, completely unaware of the danger that Maya somehow knew awaited them all. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, and Maya pulled her denim jacket tighter around her shoulders. The park's string lights flickered momentarily, casting dancing shadows across the warm pavement. In the distance, the carousel's calliope music grew louder, more insistent, as if calling to them. "Please," Maya whispered, her breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. "Trust me on this. We need to go home." But even as she spoke the words, she could feel it, the inexorable pull of fate, drawing them deeper into the park like moths to a flame. Against her better judgment, Maya found herself being pulled deeper into Wonderland's maze of attractions. Sarah had won the argument, as she usually did, with a combination of enthusiasm and guilt that Maya couldn't resist. Jake remained skeptical but supportive, keeping a protective arm around Maya's shoulders as they navigated through the growing crowd. The park was busier than usual for a Thursday evening in October. Families bundled in jackets and sweaters moved between the rides, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of neon signs advertising everything from corn dogs to caramel apples. The air was thick with the smell of fried food and the underlying scent of machinery oil that seemed to permeate every inch of the park. "Let's start with something easy," Sarah suggested, pointing toward a cluster of game booths near the park's entrance. "Ring toss, anyone? I bet I can win one of those giant stuffed bears." Maya felt a moment of relief. Games were safe, no moving parts, no mechanical failures waiting to happen. But as they approached the booth, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The carnival worker running the ring toss was setting up bottles in the exact same pattern she'd seen in her vision, just before everything went wrong. "Actually, let's skip this one," Maya said quickly, grabbing Sarah's arm. "I'm not really in the mood for games," Jake frowned, noticing the tension in her voice. "Maya, you're starting to worry me. Why aren't you telling us?" Before she could answer, a commotion erupted behind them. A group of teenagers had been trying their luck at the basketball chute next to the ring toss when one of the hoops suddenly broke free from its moorings, swinging down and missing a young man's head by mere inches. The heavy metal rim crashed to the ground with a resonating clang that echoed through the immediate area. The carnival worker rushed over, apologizing profusely, while other employees quickly cordoned off the area. "Equipment malfunction," he kept repeating, his weathered face pale with shock. "Never seen anything like it in 30 years of running these games." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't exactly what she'd seen in her vision, but it was too close. The universe seemed to be testing them, presenting opportunities for disaster at every turn. She looked around frantically, noticing other potential hazards she hadn't seen before: loose bolts on ride supports, frayed electrical cables snaking across walkways, food vendors with grease fires burning too high. "That could have killed someone," Jake muttered, staring at the broken basketball hoop. His skepticism was beginning to crack, replaced by a growing uneasiness that matched Maya's own. Sarah, however, seemed energized by the near miss. "Did you see that? It's like something out of a movie. Come on, this makes everything more exciting." She pulled them away from the game area, her eyes already fixed on a new target, the Ferris wheel looming against the darkening sky. "No," Maya said firmly, digging her heels into the asphalt. "Absolutely not. We're not getting on any rides tonight." The Ferris wheel's lights blinked in a hypnotic pattern, casting rainbow reflections on the faces of the people below. Maya could see families climbing into the gondolas, trusting their lives to the ancient machinery that groaned and wheezed with each rotation. In her vision, she'd seen sparks flying from electrical panels, metal grinding against metal until something crucial gave way. A cold wind swept through the park, carrying with it the sound of the carousel's music, that same haunting melody that had been the soundtrack to her premonition. Maya turned toward the sound and felt her knees go weak. The antique ride sat in the center of the park like a jeweled crown, its painted horses rising and falling in their eternal dance. Even from this distance, she could see families approaching it, children pulling their parents toward the ornate ticket booth. "We have to warn them," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of carnival sounds screaming from the roller coaster. Bells from the game booths, the rumble of generators powering the rides. Jake followed her gaze to the carousel, and something in his expression shifted. Maybe it was the way the lights flickered across the painted horses, or the subtle discord in the calliope music that suggested something wasn't quite right. "You really think something's going to happen, don't you?" Maya nodded, unable to trust her voice. Around them, the park continued its celebration, oblivious to the danger that seemed to lurk in every shadow, every mechanical joint, every electrical connection. She could feel fate tightening around them like a noose, each moment bringing them closer to the inevitable conclusion she'd witnessed in her vision. The temperature dropped another degree, and Maya realized with growing horror that every path they could take Every decision they might make seemed to lead in only one direction, toward the carousel that waited for them in the heart of Wonderland. Maya's attempts to steer her friends away from danger became increasingly desperate as the evening wore on. Every time she thought she'd successfully diverted them from potential harm, another threat would materialize, as if the park itself was conspiring against their escape. They'd managed to avoid the Ferris wheel, but Sarah's determination to experience thrills led them toward the tilt-a-whirl. As they approached, Maya noticed a maintenance worker frantically tightening bolts on one of the ride's cars, muttering under his breath about metal fatigue and should have been replaced years ago. She quickly suggested they grab some food instead, pulling her friends toward the concession stands. The smell of grease and sugar hung heavy in the air as they navigated between food trucks and carnival booths. Maya's senses felt hypercharged, every sound amplified, every potential danger magnified. When Jake bought them sodas from a vendor whose generator sparked intermittently, she found herself checking the electrical connections with paranoid intensity. "Maya, you're being weird," Sarah said, not unkindly, as she noticed her friend's obsessive behavior. "Like, weirder than usual. What's really going on?" The carousel's music drifted across the park, and Maya felt a chill run down her spine. In her peripheral vision, she could see the antique ride through the gaps between other attractions, its lights twinkling like stars in the gathering darkness. Families continued to gather around it, drawn by its old-world charm and the promise of gentle thrills suitable for all ages. "I keep having this feeling," Maya began carefully, "like we're not safe here, like something terrible is waiting to happen." She gestured vaguely at the park around them, but her eyes kept drifting toward the carousel. Jake set down his corn dog, his expression serious. "What kind of feeling? Like intuition or something more?" Before Maya could answer, a scream pierced the air from the direction of the haunted house. The three friends rushed toward the sound, joining a crowd that had gathered around the attraction's exit. A teenage girl emerged from the dark interior, sobbing and clutching her shoulder. "The skeleton," she gasped between tears. "It wasn't supposed to move like that. It grabbed me. I think it dislocated my shoulder." Emergency personnel arrived quickly, helping the injured girl, while maintenance workers swarmed the haunted house to investigate the malfunction. Maya overheard fragments of their conversation: hydraulic failure, safety protocols, lawsuit waiting to happen. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Throughout the park, rides were malfunctioning, safety systems were failing, and accidents were happening with increasing frequency. Maya realized that her vision might not have been about one specific incident at the carousel. It might have been a warning about the entire park. "We need to leave," she said urgently, grabbing both Jake and Sarah by the arms. "Right now. All of these accidents are not coincidences. Something is very wrong here tonight." Sarah looked around at the chaos, her earlier enthusiasm finally beginning to waver. The injured girl's sobs echoed across the park, mixing with the mechanical sounds of rides and the nervous chatter of concerned parents. "Maybe Maya's right," she said quietly. "This doesn't feel fun anymore." But as they turned toward the park's exit, Maya realized with growing horror that their path was blocked. The broken basketball hoop had created a bottleneck at the main entrance, with security guards directing visitors through a single narrow gate. The wait to leave would be at least 30 minutes, maybe longer. "We'll have to go out through the back," Jake suggested, pointing toward a service road that ran behind the food trucks. "I saw some employees using it earlier." They began making their way through the park, weaving between rides and attractions. But Maya noticed something unsettling. No matter which direction they chose, their path seemed to curve inexorably toward the center of the park. The layout, which had seemed random when they arrived, now revealed itself to be a carefully designed spiral, with all walkways ultimately leading to the carousel. The antique ride loomed ahead of them, larger than Maya remembered, its horses seeming to watch them with painted eyes that glittered in the neon light. The calliope music had grown louder, more discordant, as if the mechanical player piano was slowly breaking down. Children still rode the painted horses, their laughter mixing with the eerie melody to create a soundtrack that belonged more in a nightmare than an amusement park. "This way," Maya said desperately, pulling her friends toward what appeared to be a gap between two game booths. But as they approached, a carnival worker appeared, blocking their path with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, folks, this area is closed for maintenance. You'll have to go around the other way." The other way led directly past the carousel. Maya felt panic rising in her chest as she realized the trap they'd walked into. Every exit was blocked. Every alternate route led to the same destination. The park had become a maze with only one solution, and that solution was the antique carousel that waited for them like a patient predator. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the Oregon sky, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The rain began as a light drizzle, but quickly intensified, sending families scurrying for cover under awnings and pavilions throughout Wonderland. The carnival lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that made the park feel even more surreal and threatening. Maya, Jake, and Sarah found themselves pushed along with the crowd toward the covered areas near the center of the park. Maya's heart sank as she realized where they were being herded. The carousel sat under an ornate Victorian pavilion, its roof offering the largest sheltered space in the entire park. As the rain intensified, more and more visitors gathered around the antique ride, treating it as a refuge from the storm. "At least we're out of the rain," Sarah said, wringing water from her hair as they joined the crowd under the pavilion's decorative eaves. The carousel continued its slow rotation, its calliope music now competing with the drumming of rain on the metal roof above. Maya watched in fascination and horror as families climbed aboard the moving ride, children selecting their favorite horses while parents helped them into the ornate saddles. The painted animals seemed more vivid under the shelter's warm lights, their eyes brighter, their expressions more animated, as if the rain had somehow brought them to life. She noticed details she'd dismissed in her vision. The way the brass poles caught the light as they moved up and down. The intricate carvings on the central mechanism that controlled the ride's motion. The small plaque near the operator's booth that read Wonderland Carousel, Est, 1952. This ride had been entertaining families for over 70 years, creating countless memories of joy and wonder. But Maya knew that tonight would be different. "I need to talk to the operator," she said suddenly. Breaking away from Jake and Sarah, she pushed through the crowd toward the ride's control booth, where an elderly man in a faded uniform sat reading a newspaper, occasionally glancing up to ensure the ride was running smoothly. "Excuse me," Maya began, her voice barely audible over the music and rain. "I think there might be something wrong with the carousel. Maybe you should shut it down for the night." The operator looked up from his paper, his weathered face creasing into a confused frown. "Wrong. This ride's been running perfect for decades, young lady. Just had her annual inspection last month. Not a thing wrong with her." Maya struggled to find the words that would convince him. "I just have this feeling like something bad is about to happen. Please, just consider closing it down until the storm passes." The old man's expression softened slightly, but he shook his head. "I appreciate your concern, miss, but I can't shut down a perfectly good ride just because of a feeling. These folks paid good money to have some fun tonight, and that's what we're gonna give them." Defeated, Maya returned to Jake and Sarah, who were watching the carousel with mixed expressions. Jake seemed troubled, his engineering background allowing him to spot potential mechanical issues that others might miss. Sarah appeared mesmerized by the ride's hypnotic motion, the painted horses rising and falling in their eternal dance. "Look at that little girl," Sarah said, pointing to a child in a yellow dress who was riding a white horse with a flowing mane. "She's having the time of her life." Maya's blood turned to ice. The yellow dress, the white horse. These were exactly the details from her vision. She watched as the little girl waved to her parents, who stood at the edge of the platform taking pictures. In her mind, Maya could see what was coming. The moment when the music would skip, the horses would jerk violently. The ancient mechanism would finally surrender to decades of wear and tear. "We have to get everyone off that ride," she whispered. But her voice was lost in the sound of rain and machinery. The storm outside was intensifying, and Maya noticed that the lights throughout the park were flickering intermittently. Power surges. She realized the kind that could overload old electrical systems and cause catastrophic failures. The carousel's motor, which had been purring steadily for the past hour, began to emit a subtle whining sound that made Maya's skin crawl. Jake heard it too. "That doesn't sound right," he muttered, his eyes narrowing as he studied the ride's mechanical components. "Sounds like the motor's straining." The operator seemed oblivious to the change in sound, lost in his newspaper while the carousel continued its rotation. The families on the ride laughed and chatted, completely unaware that anything might be amiss. The little girl in the yellow dress continued to wave, her joy infectious and heartbreaking at the same time. Maya felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. She had seen what was coming, had been given a gift or a curse that allowed her to witness the future. But what good was such knowledge if she couldn't act on it? What purpose did prophecy serve if it couldn't prevent tragedy? As if summoned by her despair, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the park, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the pavilion's metal framework. The carousel's lights flickered more dramatically, and for just a moment, Maya thought she saw the painted horse's eyes glow with an otherworldly light. The music began to slow, just as it had in her vision. The carousel's music distorted as the motor struggled, creating an eerie, warped melody that sent chills through everyone within hearing distance. Maya watched in horror as her vision began to play out exactly as she'd foreseen. The painted horses jerked erratically, their smooth up-and-down motion becoming unpredictable and violent. Parents who had been smiling and taking pictures began to look concerned. Children who had been laughing started to grip their horses' reins more tightly, sensing that something was wrong, even if they couldn't articulate what it was. The little girl in the yellow dress looked around with wide, frightened eyes as her white horse bucked unexpectedly. "Stop the ride!" Maya screamed, running toward the operator's booth. But the elderly man was no longer there. His chair sat empty, the newspaper scattered by the wind that was now whipping through the pavilion. Jake and Sarah rushed after her, finally understanding the gravity of the situation. The carousel was spinning out of control, its ancient mechanism pushed beyond its limits by the storm's electrical interference. Sparks began to fly from the ride's central hub, and the smell of burning electrical components filled the air. "Where's the emergency stop?" Jake shouted, frantically searching the control booth for an override switch. His hands moved across panels and buttons, looking for anything that might bring the nightmare to an end. Maya could see the moment approaching, the exact point in time when everything would go catastrophically wrong. In her vision, it had happened when the motor finally seized, sending a shockwave through the entire mechanical system. The brass poles would snap, the platform would tilt, and the horses would break free from their moorings. "Everyone, get off!" Sarah yelled to the riders, but her voice was lost in the growing cacophony of grinding metal and electrical arcing. The storm outside seemed to be feeding the chaos, each lightning strike causing the park's power grid to fluctuate wildly. Maya made a desperate decision. If she couldn't stop the ride mechanically, maybe she could create enough of a distraction to get people to jump off before it was too late. She grabbed a metal trash can and began banging it against the side of the control booth, creating a loud, rhythmic noise that cut through the musical distortion. "Fire! Fire!" She screamed at the top of her lungs. hoping that the universal panic response would override people's instinct to stay seated on a moving ride. The reaction was immediate. Parents began lifting their children off the painted horses, even as the platform continued to rotate. The little girl in the yellow dress reached for her father, who stepped onto the moving platform to lift her to safety. Other families followed suit, abandoning the ride in a controlled evacuation that Maya prayed would be fast enough. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as the last family was stepping off the platform, Maya heard the sound she'd been dreading, a deep mechanical groan from the carousel's central hub. Jake had found what looked like an emergency switch and was frantically flipping it, but the ride's momentum was too great to stop instantly. The brass pole supporting the white horse suddenly snapped with a metallic crack that echoed through the pavilion like a gunshot. The painted horse, freed from its mounting, slid across the platform and crashed into the barrier that separated riders from spectators. The impact sent splinters of wood and metal flying through the air, and Maya instinctively threw herself in front of Sarah, shielding her friend from the debris. "Maya!" Jake's voice was filled with panic as he saw her stumble and fall. A shard of painted wood had struck her in the side, and she could feel warmth spreading across her shirt. But it wasn't the deep fatal wound she had expected. This wasn't how her vision had ended. The carousel finally ground to a halt, its platform tilted at a dangerous angle, but still largely intact. The families who had evacuated stood in shocked silence, processing how close they had come to disaster. The little girl in the yellow dress clung to her father, tears streaming down her face, but otherwise unharmed. Maya looked around in confusion. The major catastrophe she'd foreseen hadn't happened now exactly. Yes, the ride had malfunctioned, and yes, people could have been seriously injured or killed, but her intervention had changed the outcome. She had cheated fate, altered the future through her actions. Relief washed over her as she realized that prophecy wasn't a curse, it was an opportunity. She had been given the chance to save lives, and she had succeeded. But as she stood there, bleeding from her minor wound and feeling victorious, Maya failed to notice the pool of water that had collected beneath the carousel from the rain streaming through gaps in the pavilion roof. She failed to see the electrical cable that had been damaged when the horse broke free, its exposed wires now lying in the growing puddle. As she took a step backward to steady herself, her foot found the water. The vision hadn't been about the carousel itself. It had been about the aftermath. The electrical current found Maya before she even realized the danger. It was swift and silent, traveling through the rainwater with the inevitability of fate itself. There was no dramatic crash, no spectacular failure, just a quiet, deadly kiss of electricity finding its path through her body as she stepped backward into the spreading puddle. Jake saw it first. He was still at the control booth, his hands covered in grease from the carousel's machinery, when he noticed Maya's sudden stillness. She stood frozen for just a moment, her eyes wide with an expression that seemed almost peaceful, as if she finally understood something that had been eluding her all evening. Then she collapsed. "Maya!" Sarah's scream cut through the silence that had fallen over the pavilion. The aftermath of the carousel's breakdown had left everyone in a state of shocked quiet. But Sarah's voice shattered that fragile peace. Jake vaulted over the control booth's barrier and rushed to where Maya lay beside the damaged ride. The pool of water around her seemed to shimmer with residual electrical energy, and he could smell the distinctive metallic scent that accompanied high-voltage discharge. His engineering training kicked in, and he quickly identified the severed cable that had made contact with the rainwater. "Don't touch her," he yelled as Sarah started to kneel beside their friend. "The water's still electrified. We need to cut the power first." But even as he said it, Jake could see that it was too late. Maya's chest wasn't moving. Her eyes stared unseeing at the painted horses above them, and her skin had already taken on the pale, waxy appearance that he'd seen once before, when a coworker at the garage had been electrocuted by a faulty battery charger. Park security and emergency personnel arrived within minutes, their radios crackling with urgent communications as they cordoned off the area and began the process of investigating the accident. The carousel stood silent and still, its painted horses frozen in their eternal dance, witnesses to a tragedy that should have been preventable. Sarah couldn't stop crying. She sat on a nearby bench, wrapped in a blanket provided by a paramedic, while Jake gave his statement to the police. The story he told was simple and factual. They had been trying to help evacuate people from the malfunctioning ride when Maya had stepped into electrified water. An accident, pure and simple. He didn't mention Maya's visions or her desperate attempts to warn everyone about impending danger. He didn't tell them about her conviction that something terrible was going to happen at the carousel, or how she had ultimately saved the lives of the families who would have been riding when the horse broke free. Those details seemed too strange, too unbelievable for an official report. As the investigation continued, Jake found himself staring at the carousel and trying to make sense of what had happened. Maya had seen something, that much was clear. Her vision had been accurate, but incomplete. She had foreseen the danger and acted to prevent it, successfully changing the immediate outcome. But in saving others, she had walked directly into her own fate. The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood from Maya's minor wound and diluting the puddle that had become her final trap. Emergency workers covered her body with a yellow tarp, the same bright color as the dress worn by the little girl who's now safe at home with her family. Word of the accident spread quickly through the park, and Wonderland began shutting down for the night. Rides that had been operating normally just hours earlier were suddenly deemed unsafe, their mechanical problems becoming apparent only in retrospect. The basketball hoop that had fallen, the haunted house hydraulic failure, the Ferris wheel's grinding bearings, all of it part of a pattern that no one had recognized until it was too late. As Jake helped Sarah to her feet, preparing to leave the scene where their friend had died, he noticed something that made him pause. The carousel's central mechanism, damaged but still partially functional, had resumed its slow rotation. The painted horses began their familiar dance once more, rising and falling to the accompaniment of rain drumming on the pavilion roof. But there was no music. The calliope had been destroyed in the electrical surge, leaving the horses to dance in perfect, eerie silence. Jake turned away, unable to watch any longer. In the distance, he could hear the sound of sirens as more emergency vehicles arrived, their red and blue lights painting the wet pavement in shifting patterns of color. The investigation would continue for days, maybe weeks. But he already knew what they would find. A tragic accident, a young life lost to a combination of mechanical failure and unfortunate timing. They would never know that Maya had died trying to save others, or that her sacrifice had prevented a much greater tragedy. They would never understand that she had cheated death once, only to discover that fate always collects what it's owed. As they walked toward the parking lot, Sarah whispered through her tears, "She knew, didn't she?" Somehow, she knew this was going to happen. Jake nodded silently, his throat too tight with grief to speak. Behind them, the carousel continued its silent dance, a monument to the girl who had seen the future and chose to face it head-on, even knowing how the story would end. The rain washed away the last traces of evidence, but the painted horses would remember. They would continue their eternal dance, carrying the memory of Maya's sacrifice in their bright, knowing eyes.